Hey, everybody. Are we ready to start?
Yeah, let's start now.
Let's start. All right, cool. Here to tell everybody, talk to everybody a little bit about IVM podcast, mission, vision, insights, all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna basically break this down into like three parts, if you will, right? So one is just very quick overview of like overall listenership since we started. I've been thinking about like what would be the best way to kind of talk about this to all of y'all who are familiar with us but haven't really been a huge you haven't really seen what we've really done or don't know us all that well. So I was thinking about how do we kind of how do I talk to all everybody about that. So I thought what I did is I dug up a old presentation I had, something I created in 2014, and I've taken out a bunch of kind of like the ways that I thought that this would play out at that time, and then I'll talk about like what we were thinking at then and how things actually played out. And then to wrap things up, what I'll do is I'll walk everybody through some of the major insights that we got in our listener survey that was conducted at the end of last year, early this year. It's over 2 months. So just as an idea of overall stats, right? I think if you all can see this, you'll be able to see that growth has been steady and fairly nonstop, but not like the hockey stick curve that we were hoping for when we started the business. In 2017, when we kind of went independent as a network for the first time, right? I don't know if how many of you all are aware of the history, but I started in 2015, the company itself. In 2016, March, we went exclusive with Savan for about 9 months at that point in time. Before we went on with Savan, we only had two shows, so I wouldn't really consider this a network then. But we built out a number of different shows while we were on Savan. And 2017 January is when I really consider like, the start of IVM in its current incarnation to be. And so from 2017 at the start, when we did about 1.6 million or 1.7 million downloads in that first year, last year we ended the year at about 19 million downloads. So that's a 10 times growth, which is a good growth. But again, over 4 years, we would hope for better. We were hoping for better when we started, and hopefully we will start seeing that come true and play out now. So this was the first slide that I ever made for IBM. It was called Infox Media then. This was a logo that I put together by myself in about 10 minutes, and I'm sure that you can all clearly see that that is absolutely the case. It looks like it was put together by a non-designer in 10 minutes. And from then, we started to kind of, get better with our design and all that kind of stuff. But what was in this box, right? And so this was the 2014 slide. So at that time, the idea was talk-based entertainment, a variety of shows and formats. It would be primarily delivered internet-based, consumed through internet-connected phone apps, which would be our own app or apps like that. Podcasting apps, things like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast didn't exist then, but Apple Podcast, Pocket Cast, Podcast Addict was a favorite back then. Consuming through those kinds of podcasting apps, radio apps were a big thing back then. They still are to an extent, apps like TuneIn and such, or streaming apps, right, like Savan, Ghana, Spotify. And we wanted to concentrate on India-focused content, which at that point in time, almost nobody was doing. There were very, very few podcasts out there. So how did that play out? I think it mostly played out as expected. We are talk-based entertainment. We are primarily internet-based. We are available via podcasting apps, and we are available via phone apps, podcasting apps, those kinds of things. Radio apps has never really played out the way I wanted it to. I was hoping for more abilities there, but there were some regulatory issues that are part of that problem, particularly how governments issue licenses to radio stations. They're not allowed to do news and current affairs with that, so that limits the ability of talk significantly. But I was hoping that we'd be able to see more happening there. And we weren't really doing live streaming until January this year, right? So I think that even streaming is not something that we really were able to kind of get a handle on up until fairly recently. But we are focused primarily on Indian content. That is something that I think is important. So, 3.5 out of 4, I would say, on these things. But yeah, I mean, like, we some of it played out the way expected, some of it didn't. So then the next question I asked at that time is why? Why did we think that this was something that made sense at that point in time, right? So talk content, long form talk content felt like a missing media category back then. Indian culture also made it feel like this was a natural medium, right? I mean, like we are a very talkative, argumentative culture. We're a culture that basically has a long history of oral storytelling. So it really did feel like Indian culture would play a part over there. The regulatory environment for talk radio is not friendly, and talk radio is a major format of content in almost every other market where radio is not restricted like this. Another thing which I thought was important at that time is that people felt very disaffected from the media. They felt like the media didn't speak to them in any ways. And I really do believe that digital media does allow you to kind of talk more directly to certain types of audiences. And the last point at that time was that the India's average commute time was huge, right? 40, 50 minutes each way. That's an incredibly long average commute time. And that is a time that's an ideal time to listen to audio content and hopefully podcasts. Now, how did that stuff play out, right? So I don't think the category is missing anymore. I think that there's enough podcasts out there that we can't say that it's a missing media category. I still think we're very, very early days in terms of where we are, but I don't think we would call it a missing category. I don't think Indian culture has played much of a role so far either, but I do believe that this will accelerate things once we hit a critical mass. I do think that the thought behind Indian culture being a accelerator does. I don't think that that's invalid, but I don't think it's really played out so far. The regulatory environment for talk radio is still incredibly unfriendly. When it comes to polarization of views, if anything, that's become more of an issue than it used to be earlier. And I think that's I feel like that's that's an area we need to kind of do more in than we're doing right now. How do we talk to smaller niches? Um, and the commute time, right? So I mean, like pre-pandemic, that's absolutely when people were listening, right? People were primarily listening on their commute pre-pandemic. Now, what we found to be interesting is that once we've gone into this pandemic, it's become less and less kind of tied to a time of consumption, right? People are consuming content throughout the day. It's not necessarily just while they're on their way to work or back from work or out doing chores or what have you, right? But other spaces of listening have opened up that
Yeah.
earlier were not being used. I'm sorry, does somebody have a question? Okay, I'm going to continue, but if anybody did have a question, please do let me know. And so then the next question was why at that point in time in 2014, right? So 2014, not that long ago in some ways, very, very long time ago in some other ways. Uh, at that time, we were looking at the penetration of internet capable phones as a big deal, right? This was still very early in terms of like, Android was still in early days. We were very, very, I mean, like it wasn't anywhere close to where it was. Increase in 3G usage. Notice I say 3G usage, not 4G usage, right? I mean, like this was at that point in time. The amount of Wi-Fi that people were using was also increasing at that time. The increasing consumption of media over the internet. So YouTube had already become a real thing. People were consuming quite a bit of content on YouTube. But in India, we still hadn't seen like the OTT explosion that we saw in the subsequent years. And again, the idea that talk radio just did not exist in India was the primary idea that really bothered me, right? And when I started to, I was like, it's very unlikely that this regulatory environment changes. But even if it does change, we'd be in a good position if we start creating supply of this kind to start doing syndication deals with different radio stations. Now, again, the regulatory environment has not changed, so that hasn't played out. But I always thought that that was an interesting thing, right? And so, the one thing that I think we didn't really anticipate over here was the advent of Geo. And what so in 2014, I really did think that audio, one of the advantages we had was the small file size, relative to video, right? I really thought that that was a big advantage, and I thought that that would be a reason why people would prefer to consume audio in a situation where iffy networks exist, and in a situation where you have extremely low data limits. I thought audio would be attractive from that perspective. But when Geo started giving a gigabyte a day, it essentially made video completely logical and completely doable. So I mean, like it turned out to be that it wasn't an advantage, and video started taking over the consumption of online media that people were doing, and that led to and I think that that's one of the factors in terms of why things didn't grow as fast as I thought they would. But who knows? I mean, there could be other factors as well, right? But I think that that was a big one, right? I really was kind of counting on, like, this being a transitionary phase in terms of where people are with video consumption. I'm sorry, audio consumption versus video consumption, right? I thought the transitionary phase would favor audio consumption, but that clearly did not play out.
One question, Amit,
Yes, yes,
just
Sunny,
running.
please.
So you talked about negative regulatory compliances. So
Mhm.
what were exactly those, and like was it like indifference from the government, or negative?
No, so so the way radio licenses are issued right now, right? So there are, okay, I'll give you a fairly, I'll give you a basic this, right? Radio licenses are issued to each radio station by the government. There is no third-party body as the Ministry of INB that releases that gives radio licenses. The last set of radio licenses that were given out in 2018. So Bangalore and Bombay stations went for 150 crore rupee radio license, 150 crores for 10 years license. Delhi went for 180 crores for a 10-year license, right? Now, and now let's add one other piece to it. So not only is there a high cost infrastructure to the way radio is structured, which makes music the most likely thing to succeed, but there is also very implicitly into that license written out the term no news or current affairs are allowed. The only news you're allowed to do on radio is the script that Doordarshan releases every day. Sorry, not Doordarshan, All India Radio. All India Radio makes a script available every day. If you want to do news on your radio station, that is the only news you're allowed to do. The reason for this is that this was again a this was a world prior, but I mean, like, this still holds true. But the radio has always been seen as a mobilization medium when it comes to revolution or coup, right? When you look at countries where governance is not that strong, radio has always been one of these kinds of, has always been the primary medium for this. If you would look at, like, coups that happened in Africa or South America in the 1970s and 80s, the first thing that would occur would be seize the radio station, seize the television station, seize the newspapers, right? And so there was a certain amount of hesitation on the part of the government to allow unfettered freedom on the radio. And so that's led to a problem from the content side, right? In addition to that, the high license fee has led to a problem from the supply side. A city like Bombay, which is one of the larger metro areas in this country, has 11 radio stations. New York City, if you're living in the city, you have access to 114 radio stations, out of which over 100 are talk-only stations, right? So that's, I think, I think that's where the negative regulatory environment exists. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Sorry, so to circle back a little bit to the revenue models, right? So when I first thought of the business, I thought that we could look at revenue models like ads against content, e-commerce tie-ins, right? And by this, I mean either merchandising or in 2014, there were a couple of really interesting examples of podcasters who were creating their own merchandise. So I can give you two examples off the top of my head. One is a very old podcaster named Adam Carolla. He's been around from, like, almost the beginning. He's one of the earliest podcasters. He created his own alcohol brand. And he basically would sell that by doing ads on his podcast. And it turned into a multi-million dollar business. Similarly, there is a comedian named Aisha Tyler. I think many of you might have seen her. She was a host on Whose Line Is It Anyway for quite a while. So she had her own podcast called the Aisha Tyler Show, and she again also created a liquor brand which she was able to kind of sell directly via the internet, and also it turned into a fairly large kind of business for them. So I thought that this would be this could be a possible way for monetization to occur, where you could create a brand for a show or a network which kind of speaks in tune to that, and see if that would there. The other thing would be merchandise, is merchandising a real business, right? So I mean, like, I thought that the other revenue model I thought would be important would be syndication, where we could look at the content that we create, getting it out and having it played on radio stations across the world, right? Get them to have, like, well, all these different shows which are Indian context. There are radio stations in most major countries which are geared towards Indian diaspora or multiple diasporas, and then they have Indian block and Vietnamese block and Korean block and that kind of thing, right? So I thought there would be an opportunity to syndicate content into those kinds of radio stations, but that did not really work out either. And then events. I thought that events would be a major form of possible revenue for us, right? And so the only one of these which has really worked out, or has only that's really kind of played out, is advertising. Branded content is was something that was completely unanticipated. I did not realize when I was planning the business out that branded content would be a major source of revenue for us, right? I thought we'd be doing some production and distribution for other media houses, or, like, maybe some brand, maybe some companies where we create internet podcasts or that kind of thing. I thought production distribution services might be something, but I never really understood, never really thought branded content would become as big as it did. As I mentioned, e-commerce or syndication never became a real model. And events are something that we're looking at fairly seriously right now, right? We've already started doing these lives for Cyrus Says, and over the next few months, our plan is to make sure that we have a live at least once a month or once a week for most of the shows that we're doing. And as we start doing these live broadcasts, I want to kind of also start looking at live events to become more and more of a thing, or maybe even digital events. A few other major learnings about podcasting, just generally, right? Length is not as important as regularity. I think that what we've seen over the last 4 years is that the the more regular a podcast is, making sure that you don't miss anything, making sure that you have some sense, you're matching the expectation of what your listener is expecting, right? I feel like that has become that's one of the most important things that we've seen. The other thing I'd say is topics matter, but not as much as you think, right? I mean, like, the most important thing is the host, right? So the next point, as you see, guests matter, but hosts are more important. The host is why people come to listen to this stuff over and over. Why you get a listener on every week. Why does it's about hanging out with Cyrus Brocha or Varun Dugirala or Ritasha Rathore, or any of these people who we have. People want to come and hang with them for an hour. And that's what I think is the most important thing here, right? It doesn't matter so much about what subjects being spoken about, or it doesn't matter so much about who it is. Like, guests matter, but not to the degree that you would think it would, right? Like, if I have a huge guest on one episode, it's not going to spike the traffic of that show beyond a point. And the traffic the next week is going to go back down all the way, right? The host is what drives that kind of regularity of listening, that, kind of organic, week to week kind of consistent this. And I think the number one thing I'd say, right, is what makes a good podcast is storytelling. It doesn't matter if it's a conversational show or a storytelling show or any other kind of show, right? But the ability to tell a story within the format that you're doing, I think that's the most important thing. All right. Does anybody have any questions about that? Because I wanted to talk about just, like, generally the general vision, mission, progress, anything like that. Because if not, then what I'll do is I'll start talking a little bit about the listener survey that we did last month. Nobody? Okay. All right. Let me go. Let me move on then. So, listener survey. So we did this. We've done this we did this last year, and I think we did this the year before as well. What we do as part of this listener survey, or the way that we kind of create this listener survey, is we don't publicize it anywhere but within podcast content, right? So what that makes sure is that the only people who answer this survey are people who are actually listening to our content. It's not people who are like, yeah, let me fill out a survey for a random mug. It's not like that. It's only people who know about podcasts, who are interested. They are the only people who come. They come to the website, or we give the URL out as well, and they will go there to kind of fill this out. The number of respondents we had this year increased from 766 in 2019 to 1283 this year. What was interesting is that last month we kept the survey active for 4 months. It was active till April. This year we kept the survey. The survey is no longer active. Basically, we shut the survey down a couple of days ago. So it is only 2 months worth of data. So I think that's interesting in terms of, like, just how many more people decide to come and do the survey. So I'll talk about age first, what some of the highlights as we go through. So our largest group is 18 to 40. 26 to 40 is the bigger chunk over there. But what I thought was interesting this year was that we saw a drop from 91% to 85% in the 18 to 40. And we saw 41 to 50 grow from 5.9 to 9.3. And I think that's interesting, because I think what we want to see is we do want to see wider growth across all age groups, rather than a very concentrated number of listeners in a small age group. Because again, the kind of content this is, I think that the wider this dispersal is amongst people who are listening to it, the better off I think we will be. So the responses from women this year went up from 17.5% to 21%, but it is still a number which is extraordinarily imbalanced, and it's something that we need to address, because I think that the sign of maturity in any kind of internet platform or any kind of internet space is when this number goes from 20% to 40-45% at least. I think this is something that we've seen across the internet in all kinds of different platforms. When they first come to India, they almost always are male dominated, and then over a period of time they start becoming more evened out. I think Pratilipi has a larger number of women who listen to who read on it than men. But I think generally we see kind of more of a larger percentage of men on this. But I think that for us to say that, this market has reached some degree of maturity, we're going to have to get that number up from 21% to like 35, 40, 45% at least. So the geography. So respondents from India grew from 75% to 82%. So again, that is, I think, a good thing, because we want to concentrate primarily on India. We think the content that we are creating is being created for the Indian market. And so the more people, not that we don't want to be part of the diaspora, but there are more Indian people in India than there are in the diaspora. So I mean, like, we'd like to see these numbers be higher in India. The other major markets for us are US, Canada, Australia, UK, Singapore, and UAE. We have responses from, I think, about 100, not 100, but I think something like 70 odd countries. But these are the largest ones for us. Where do people, what do they do for work? What do we know about them from a professional point of view, right? So it's an affluent audience. 85% are earning over 5 lakh rupees, 52% are earning over 12 lakh rupees, 28% are earning over 25 lakh rupees per annum. The most common occupations that we saw were people working in tech. We saw students, finance, and entrepreneurs. And almost 80% of our audience commute to work by foot, car, or public transportation. And this, I think, is interesting because, again, if you're on a two-wheeler, listening to a podcast is not exactly the greatest idea in the world, right? You need to be a little more aware of what's going around you. But I think that if you're on foot, car, or public transportation, these are great places for you to be able to kind of listen to a podcast. And I want to talk a little bit about this. We're looking at figuring out how to kind of create some sort of subscription layer to what we're doing. And I thought this was interesting, right? And this is something this surprised the hell out of me, right? Would you be willing to pay for early access to content? And we had 28% say yes, 71% say no. I thought that this, and then we asked, would you be willing to pay for additional content which will be available exclusively to paying subscribers? And we got 52% yes, 47% no over there. I honestly thought that more people would be willing to pay for early access to content, because in what I see is I see a lot of fandom, right? People are really, really into the hosts who they're listening to. And so I really thought that we would see a much higher degree of early access, people paying for early access. But that seems to be, yeah, there are some who are willing to do it, but additional content seems to be the winner over there. And so I think that as we go forward is how we're going to kind of think about how we want to concentrate on the subscription piece of what we do. And that was it. Please let me know if there are any questions.
Hi, Amit.
Hey. Hi,
Nitin,
Ankit.
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ankit.
Yeah, so two questions.
Yes.
So IVM has its own app as well, right?
Correct. Yes.
So are there plans to improve that app, or like mix it with what Pratilipi FM is, like how Disney Plus Hotstar is? So are there plans to like basically improve the app or integrate it with Pratilipi FM?
No, so I think as of right now, the plans are to keep Pratilipi FM and IVM as separate brands. Pratilipi FM is more of a analog to YouTube, and the IVM app would be more of an analog to a Amazon Prime or a Netflix, if you will. Will be a closed app with a curated amount of content inside it, whereas Pratilipi FM being an app where people can come and submit their own content. So the plans at this point in time are to keep them somewhat separate. We do plan a significant number of improvements on our app. There is a lot of work going on right now on upgrading the Android app, as well as getting the IVM iOS app ready for release. And besides that, we're also working on, so we work with a company called Adori. Adori is our hosting platform. It's where we generate the RSS feeds, which are then sent out to all the various podcasting platforms that consume our content, right? And so we've been working with Adori on creating a web version of the, basically a web app as well that kind of can be part of the website, so that we don't have to double publish. And when we publish into the CMS, the page gets created directly. You get some additional sharing features and stuff like that, which are not available right now. So we've been working on that. We're hoping to roll the Adori app, the Adori web app, and the iOS app in the month of February itself. We're looking to roll out new version of the Android app in the month of February as well.
Sure. Second question is basically not a question, but like asking your suggestions. Can you suggest some podcast from India which is similar to what Joe Rogan does in US, like bringing in a variety of celebrities which are not just Bollywood celebrities, but from a huge number of domains, like different domains, from like scientists to philosophers to like Bollywood celebrities also.
Sure.
But talking to them very frankly and like having those frank discussions and all. So are there any podcasts existing in India that are doing that? Can you suggest some?
Yeah, so I think there are quite a few that do that, right? So first, I mean, like our flagship show, Cyrus Says, right, with Cyrus Brocha, that's about 50 to 60% of what that content is, right? I mean, like we bring in all different kinds of people to just, talk about all kinds of things, right? Besides that, on our network, there are a number of shows. Most of our shows are more content, are more topic based, if you will. So if you're looking for finance people, we have Paisa Vaisa. If you're looking for marketing, we have Advertising is Dead. If you're looking for people who are in the content business, we have storytellers and story sellers. The Filter Coffee podcast talks to a wide variety of people across different genres. If we go outside of the network, Ranveer Alabadia has probably what is the most popular podcast out there right now, the Ranveer Show. So I mean, like I would say that is a good example of that kind of content as well. There are quite a few. I mean, like, in terms of talking to this, most of them don't really have that many celebrities, because celebrities are hard to get on to these platforms generally. But you will find a lot of varied conversations with a number of different people.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome cases.
Hi, Amit.
Hi, Saurabh.
Yeah. So I have a rather very journalistic question. So, how mature is the Indian podcast ecosystem? Because podcast is sort of as you mentioned in your survey as well, that it's something which people working in the tech or like entrepreneurial ecosystem, they're kind of like more aware of podcast, but it's still like not a very, like common thing. Like people, as far as the awareness part is concerned, like I don't really know. I'm just talking about from my perspective, and particularly for like the Indian ecosystem. And second question would be like, how do you think, like, if it's not very, mainstream, or if it's not something like that a lot of people are familiar with, how not familiar with, but like aware of, and so how do you think like it could be kind of made mainstream?
Sure. So let's take them one at a time, right? So the first answer to your question, the question to your first, the answer to your first question is absolutely not. There is no way that we could consider this anywhere close to mainstream right now, right? This is our number one app, or sorry, the number one way that people consume podcasting is via Apple Podcasts, right? And as you all could tell, or I'm sure most of you heard me try and hijack our meeting yesterday. Our all hands are talking about Clubhouse and iOS over there, right? But it is the same kind of issue, right? I mean, like if I have 30% of my consumption happening on what is a platform that is less than 2% penetration in India, that's a huge issue, right? So we're nowhere close to being mainstream at this point in time. It's very much a niche product, right? But will that change? Yes, I do believe that that will change. I'll tell you why. If the problem in India has always been the regulatory problem primarily, that has led to that's led to this tremendous supply constraint. So if you look at any other market which is not as tightly regulated as the Indian market is, you will see a very consistent 1/3 2/3 split. Okay, 1/3 of people are primary listeners of talk content, 2/3 people are primary listeners of music content, right? This holds true across all different kinds of geographies. Now what this tells me, or what I think that we can imply from this, is that this is some sort of human nature, right? That 1/3 of us are more likely to want to listen to some form of discourse content, and 2/3 of us are more likely going to want to listen to some form of musical content, right? So the market in front of us is huge, right? And the surveys from certain large consulting companies aside, I don't think that there are more than 25-30 million people listening to podcasts in India today, right? And so given that, if we look at what 1/3 of the population of India is, right, that would be 500 million people. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to get to 500 million people or anything. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to make a percentage of the market and say we should have this. But my point being that that is the possible number of people who might be interested in listening to talk content. And we simply are not servicing them today. Right. The second part of your question was around what do we need to have that happen. So one of the challenges I think that's been there in the podcasting ecosystem as it's been so far, right, it's been dominated by people like me, right, which are primarily English speaking. You know, how else do I say this? Come from privileged backgrounds, right? It's primarily been driven by people like me. And that's not the way that this is going to grow to the way that it's going to. It has to be where we're doing content in multiple languages, regional languages, because people like to listen in the language they're most familiar in, right? So we have to be doing that kind of stuff. We have to make more content available. The supply is the problem here, right? Because if you are somebody who wants to listen to a podcast in Malayalam, you'll find one podcast in Malayalam that might be out there somewhere. But then what do you do after that? What's next? Right? But so the goal has to be to kind of make sure that there is enough stuff for that person who wants to listen to podcasts in Malayalam that he can listen to us for 10-12 hours a week. Right? And so that is, I think, that I think is the problem. Is the Indian speaking market of podcasting in India at a somewhat mature space? I think that might be, it's more mature than the non-Indian market is, but it's still not mature. Sorry, the non-English market, not the non-English market, but it's still not mature. But yeah, no, I think that language content around different other subjects, we need more storytelling, we need more current affairs. I mean, like, these are the things. If you look at what are the most popular radio shows in markets like the US, right? You will almost always come to political content. Political content is always the most this, right? One anecdote I like to talk to people about a lot is the two most famous commentators in the US, right, are Rachel Maddow on the left and Sean Hannity on the right. Rachel Maddow has a TV show on MSNBC. Sean Hannity has a TV show on Fox. They're both known mostly for this, but they have daily radio shows as well, and their daily radio shows have 10 times the audience the TV shows do. Their radio shows do, the TV shows do about 300,000 to 500,000 people viewing them every night. Their radio shows are both 5 million plus each.
Okay.
Yeah. So more content.
Okay, so like just a follow-up question to your like last answer. I think yeah, like that makes sense. If we can create a podcast in like regional languages, then probably we can sort of enter into that segment. So like, what do you think is the major problem there? Whether it is the content supply, or whether you think it's the like we cannot see the demand part, but like, and do you think it's the content supply in regional languages for the podcast that's like the major constraint? Secondly, like does IBM have plans to come up with podcasts in regional languages in like say next 2 months, 6 months?
So yeah, I think supply is the primary problem over there. I think that the more, it's a chicken and egg problem, right? In terms of why, how the supply doesn't increase. Right now, monetization is poor, right? I mean, like, and without, without trying to figure out some form of monetization, how do you increase the amount of supply, right? So you're going to have to invest on the supply end. Right. It doesn't really make sense to invest on the demand side at this point. It makes sense to invest on the supply side. So we're going to have to invest on the supply side to kind of create more content for people who want to consume in regional languages.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is monetization a problem even in the mature market like the US and the like Canada, Europe? Like, is monetization for podcasts a problem even in those markets?
It's that the answer to that's not a clean yes or no. It is not so much of a problem for larger organizations who are able to kind of put together great sales teams like we have with Sanjeev and Jayesh who are on this call, right? So for larger organizations, it's become much more of an easy, not so much of a problem. But if you are an independent podcaster trying to kind of make it on your own, it is not a solved issue there.
Okay.
Right. So I'll give you an example of the New York Times. The New York Times has a show called The Daily. The Daily is considered to be the most valuable IP that the New York Times has created in the last 35 years.
Okay.
Right. And so podcast, I'll give you another example. You've heard of The Ringer, which got acquired by Spotify about a year and a half ago?
No, not really.
Okay, so The Ringer is a sports website, primarily sports and pop culture website. They had a very interesting way of kind of approaching the media business, the online media business. They used text as a loss leader. Basically, they wrote a lot of articles and they used text basically because text does not monetize well through advertising, right? So they use text as a loss leader to kind of garner audience and then try to push that audience towards podcasting and monetize podcasting.
Okay.
So podcasting monetizes well, like the CPM rates internationally are amongst the highest. But again, you need to have a certain amount of scale for you to be able to get access to those, to get access to that money.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else?
Hi, Amit. I have a question.
Yes, please, Nikhil.
Yeah. So you remember we were recently, talking about conversions of podcasts into books if the podcasters are interested. So I wanted to understand if there is any interest in that entire thing from the podcasters themselves? Are they interested? Do they look interested at least?
No, so I think so far it's been a interesting conversation. Varun is a little too interested, which is why it's taking so long. He wants to really figure out how he's going to write this, how he's going to put this book together.
Right.
So there is general interest across a number of different people who want to do this stuff, right? I've spoken to Anupam Gupta at Paisa Vaisa. He has interest in doing this. I have spoken to Varun at Advertising is Dead, Shunya One, Sheila Ditya, and myself. Well, we think that there is a tremendous potential in doing this stuff, whether physical books, ebooks, the entire gamut, right? I mean, like, I think that there is a tremendous possibility around this. You know, I think we'll see how this plays out when I think we spoke about this, right? Amit Verma is converting a number of his podcasts into three. He has a 3-book deal that he got from Westland Publishers for his The Seen and the Unseen podcast.
Right.
And I think we'll see how well that takes off. But I mean, like, you know, just I don't see why we shouldn't do this. Right. I think that this is something that we absolutely want to do. Right. Again, I know it's been like I think we spoke not quite a month ago, a little less than a month ago, but it's been a while, right? And I think one of the challenges over there in terms of why Varun is, because Varun's like, no, I want to do this like this, and so let me think about how I'm going to do this, and if I have to write this like this, how am I going to write this?
I mean, obviously, writing a book and then publishing it, it can be a huge process, long process. It might take time. I just wanted to discern whether there is interest or not, because so recently there was this person called Bhargavi, who was a podcaster.
Yes.
Followers, I mean, subscribers on her podcast, huge podcast. Like, it's a big podcast, I guess. She wanted to. She's one of our our legal counsel's friend, I guess. Or
correct, right.
So through her, she came to us. And she wants to publish a book, and she's very serious about it. So I was thinking, yeah, I mean, there is some interest, right, in that entire market, but so that, you know, now that I know that podcasting is very young in India, and the market is niche and small, and will grow like 100 times in the next 5 years. But then, if there is interest in, you know, converting these podcasts into books, there's another vertical that can garner a huge, you know.
Yeah, no, so to be honest, Niket, I think of I think of these books as a multifold opportunity, right? Yeah. Not just as a revenue opportunity, but it is also a marketing opportunity.
Yeah, true.
People do not know about podcasts the way they know about books. Right. And so I think that if we can, so say, for example, let's take Shunya One. Okay. On Shunya One, Sheila Ditya and I have spoken to some of the most interesting startup founders out there, right? We've spoken to a great number of people and had some really deep and insightful conversations with them. If we turn this into like a 20-chapter book, right, with where we pick the 20 best episodes and we kind of put that out there, right? The number of people who are going to read this book or who are going to come across this book will be much higher than the number of people who have come across the podcast so far.
Podcast, exactly. So you can actually drive, you know, traffic from the book to the podcasting industry.
Exactly. Right? So I definitely see it as a multifaceted opportunity in that sense.
All right. Let's see how fast we can.
No, we're going to do this, dude. I mean, there's no doubt that we're going to do this. I wanted to do Advertising is Dead first because Advertising is Dead is just, it's a cool sounding name for a book.
Exactly. Even it's a ringer, man. I mean, yeah, catches your attention, right?
Yeah. So that's why I really wanted to try and see if we can get that one going first. Yeah. But we'll pick up the conversations with others as well.
Sure. Done. Thank you, man.
Cool. Anybody else? If there are no other questions, should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I guess it's done. So let's wrap it up for the day.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Amit. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, everybody. And if anybody has any questions, then just reach out whenever they want to. We're all on the same Slack.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye.